Hello and welcome to Coding Jackpot. In this video, we are going to see how we can develop a cascading drop-down list in .NET 6 Entity Framework, and we are going to use Blazor server for that. So what we are going to develop at the end of this coding tutorial is we are going to have three drop-downs: country, state, and city. So whenever we select anything in the country, then based on that country selection, the states are going to populate. And if we select any of the states, then in that state, the cities are going to populate. And if we change it to anything else, then again, the state and the city will be reset. So let's see how we can develop this. So we have opened Visual Studio 2022 and we'll create a new project. In this we'll select Blazor server app and we'll name it as Blazor app 1. Next, and we're going to select .NET 6 long-term support and click on create. So this will create the default Blazor server app. So if we go in the solution explorer, in this pages we have this index.razor page. So we are going to open this index.razor page, and whatever content we have, we just will simply remove it. And let's make it and name it as cascading drop-down list 1. Fine. And so we have removed the default context from this index.razor page, and we have added a simple coding section. Now let's go in our database and create the required tables for country, state, and city. So here I have opened SQL Server, and in this I have a database DemoDB, and here I'll be creating three tables. One is country, and it will have ID and name. ID will be the primary key. Then I have a state, ID and name, and in this I am using country ID, and I have a table city, and it is also having the same columns ID and name, and here I am using state ID. So state will have a country ID and city will have a state ID. So let's create these three tables. So when I execute this script, I so I can country, state, city. So here you can see three tables are created in this demo DB. Here you can see the database name, and I have ID, ID name, country ID, ID name, state ID. So let's insert few records in this table. So I'm inserting three records in the country table. So here now if we see the country, I have three records. So let's similarly let's insert for the records in state. And similarly we can do for the city as well. So it's like an insert script. Here we are not inserting the primary key because it is, if we see the identity column, it's 1 comma 1. So it's starting from 1 and incremented by 1. So we are only inserting the other values like name and state ID. Similarly, in case of country, we are only inserting the name of the country. The ID is auto increment. So let's check the records. So here I have the three records for the country, then I have the states, and then at the end I have the city. So these many cities are there. Fine. Now what we are going to do is like we are going to go to this package manager console and update the data models based on the database first approach, because here if we have already created the database, and we have the tables in it. Okay, so we have these three tables in our demo DB. Now here in this Blazor app 1, I'm going to create a new folder and name it as DB models. Fine. And in this package manager console, we are going to so before this we have to install these three NuGet packages: Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So let's go on this Blazor app 1 and select manage NuGet packages, and here we can install this one. You simply have to accept this. Let's install the second one. Okay, so once all these three dependencies are installed, we can go in the project dependencies and check the packages section. Here we'll find all the three, whatever we have installed successfully. Okay, now we have to go in this package manager console, and here I should have the default project. The project should be the one which is having this where we want to create our data models. Okay, so this is the Blazor app 1, and in this DB model folder I want my data model. So I have to copy this. So this is the server name, the name of my server, which is nothing but if I disconnect it from here, and or if I like connect it again, then I'll get the server name. So this is the server name. Okay, so that server name we have to write it here against the server. Then the database name, then we have to mention the trusted connection equal to true, and the NuGet package we have to mention. Then we have the output directory where we want our data models to be created. So I have named it as DB models, and I have to write, we have to just mention the force flag, because if the classes already exist, the data models already exist, then it will be forcefully updated. So this scaffold DB context we are copying and pasting it here. So let's click enter key. So if all is well, then we simply will get the desired output in our DB models folder. So now the build has started. Once the build get succeed and the data models are generated, then automatically it will create the required classes in this DB models folder. So let's wait for it to get complete. Fine. So here you can see. So here you can see in this DB models, I like this demo DB context is created, and apart from this demo DB context, we have the city, country, and state. So these are like we are having three tables in our database. So for those three tables, we have the respective classes with all the required fields. Whatever fields we have in our database, the same fields are created here. Now, if we go and see in this context class, okay, which is getting inherited from this DB context. So here you will see like we have three DB set. Okay, so these are like DB set of those tables. Now here there's a warning, so we'll just comment of the warning. And apart from this, we have the connection string. To connect to our database, we have a connection string. So that connection string is getting stored here: trusted connection, database name, and server. So we have to comment off this connection string also, because what we are going to do is like we are going to add the connection string in this app setting JSON folder. So here just above this logging, we'll add the connection string. So here we have added this connection string tag, and we have named the connection string as DB connection. Okay, then we have the server, database, and trusted connection. All these three things we have. Now for our application to use this connection string, we have to mention that connection string in our program.cs file. So here you see this, we have this different type of services like Razor pages, server side Blazor, singleton. So just below this, we have to add a new service, or we have to what do we say? We have to add a piece of code through which we can access the connection string from the app setting.json file. So let's add that. So here we have added this builder.services add db context, and inside this add db context we are going to mention the name of the db context. So here in our C, in our this db models folder, we have this demo db context, so that name we're going to mention here, and then we are passing the options parameter, and in that we are going to use SQL server. So we are getting two different errors. So for this first error is like we have not inherited the namespace, so we are going to press control dot, and we are going to get this using Blazor app 1 db models. So that is that got added here. Now for this we are going to use the NuGet package namespace, which is Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So that also got added here now. Now inside this we are going to use the builder configuration and get the connection strings from the DB connection. So this DB connection name should match this DB connection. Okay. So these are like through this program.cs we are just pulling the DB connection, and the DB context we are going to use is demo DB context. Fine. So this was like we have created the database and we have created the DB models also. Now in the pages we have the index.razor page. So here we are going to use we are going to add few namespace through which we can use this demo DB context, and also we can access this DB models folder. So let's add that. So using DB models, and we are going to inject this DB context. Okay, so we have injected this DB context, and for this DB context we have inherited the DB models folder. Now here we want to create three drop down list. One is for country, another one is for state, and third is one for city. So we are going to create three variables to store the data whatever we are going to pull from this database. So if we go and see the database, here we have three like country and the states and the city, these three records. So we'll have to create three variables in this code. So here in this code section, we have simply created three variables: public list of country, and we have named it as countries. Then we have list of state and list of city. So apart from these three variables, three list variables, we are going to have three more variables where we can store the selected index. For example, if the user has selected country, then we have to store the index of that country, like which out of three which was selected, and that index will be is nothing but the ID of the country. Okay, so here we have three IDs, so this is nothing but the index. So we have to declare three variables that will be of integer type. So here we have declared three variables: selected country ID, selected state ID, and selected city ID. So apart from we are going to declare one string variable which will hold text, and the initial value will be empty. Fine. Now what we are going to do is like we are going to create a div structure, and the class we are going to apply is a row. So this class is part of this Blazor app and it's a part of Bootstrap. So by default, the Bootstrap library is inherited in this Blazor app, so we don't have to include it anywhere. This is a Bootstrap class and row. So inside this, we are going to have different three divs inside that row, and we are going to apply some Bootstrap class to it. So here we are going to apply this Bootstrap class. to all the three divs, and inside this we are going to have a label. Let's name it as country, and this will be state, this will be city. So we have three labels, and inside these three, and just below these three, all three labels, we are going to add a three drop down list. So let's add the drop down list. So here we've added a simple drop down using a select, and the value is 0 for select country. So similarly, we are going to name the ID as DDL country, and let's copy this one and paste it here and paste it here. So here we're going to add select state, and this is select country, and let's name it as DDL state, and this is DDL country. So we have changed the ID. Now here if you see, we have declared three variables: selected country ID, state, and city. So we are going to assign all these three values to this class. And if you see the select, the drop down list select, we have added this class form control. So here we are going to add a value equal to @ selected country ID. So this is the value for this, and similarly we are going to add for this state and city. So here we have included this in double quotes. So this value equal to double quotes @ selected country ID. So same thing, we have to copy it from here and paste it here for selected state ID, selected city ID. So it will be like selected state ID and selected city ID. Now, so like we have three drop downs with the default selected value and the default selected option like country, select state. Now we have what we did is like we created three list. So whatever data we have in this list that should be like looped here and binded to other options. Like if we have three countries, then it should have three options here, but currently we only have the value 0, which is the default one. So what we are going to do is we are going to add a loop here, for loop. We're going to add a for each loop. So here we have added a for each loop for the countries. Okay, so this countries is nothing but a list of country, and we have the item option value equal to the ID, and the display name is the name. So same thing we have to add it here for the state and for the city. Now the variables we are going to change here is states and cities. Fine. So what we have is like we have all the three drop downs ready. Apart from this drop down, we are going to simply add a div to display the selected text. So @ text. So that text, whatever value we are changing, that we have to add it. We will be storing in this text variable, or we will be appending that in this variable. So far what we have did is like we created three drop downs and binded all the default selected value and whatever options we have, that we did as a part of loop. So we have the country, we have the state, and we have the city. So three drop downs we are having. Fine. Now what we have to do is like in the code section, what we did is like we only have the variables. So we have to pull the data, get the data from the database and assign to these variables. So let's create the default basic on initialized method. So here we are going to add the basic on initialized method, and in this we are going to add a method to get countries. So we'll need three methods to get the countries, get the states, and get the cities. Public void. So we have this get countries. Similarly, we'll have get states and get cities, but get states by country ID. So the input parameter will be country ID, and here we are going to get cities by state ID, and the input parameter will be state ID. Right. So we'll take this countries variable and put it here, and if we see, we have created a instance of variable of db context. So we are going to use this db context to query our database. So db context dot, we have countries dot to list. So we'll be pulling all the countries, and similarly for states equal to db context dot states dot where country ID equal to country ID. So what we are going to do is, here is like we are going to pull the states based on the country ID. Similarly, we are going to write the same query for our cities. So here cities equal to where state ID equal to state ID. So we have this all three drop downs. But if we see, we are only calling this get countries on the load of the screen of. So whenever like the screen get this index razor page dot get initialized, we are only calling this get countries. We are not calling the other two methods. So those two methods we are going to call on change event. So for all these three drop downs, we are going to create a on change event. So for this country, let's create the on change event. So on this, so let's run how it looks. So build has started. Okay, so here we have the country. We have all the three countries, but we don't have the city. Nothing is happening. Even if we change anything in the country drop down, nothing is happening in the state and city. So that's because we have not added the on change event for all the three drop downs. Okay, so let's add now three events we'll be creating for this country, state, and city. So here in this code section, we're going to add a on change event for country, and this is like ddl drop down list country on change. Similarly, we are going to add an empty for ddl state, and same will be for ddl city. So we have added three events: ddl country, ddl state, and ddl city. Now let's bind all these three events on this drop down. So here we have created @on change, @ddl country underscore on change. So similarly, we are going to add another event for state drop down. So here we have the ddl state on change, and same way we are going to have for ddl city on change. Fine. So we have created three events and we have binded all those three events to the three drop downs. Now on change of this of the country drop down, what we are going to set is like we are going to set the selected state ID equal to 0 and selected city ID equal to 0. That means whatever selection was there for the state and city, those two selection should change to the default one because there is a change in the country. And we are going to make a new, we are going to reinitialize this to states and city. So states equal to new list of state and city is equal to new list of city. And here we start state has changed. And similarly for state change, there will be change only in the city, like we are resetting the city part. Now we have to add a if clause. If the selected value is greater than 0, then we have to call the, we have to get the states for that country. So here we have simply added a piece of if clause. If the event dot value is greater than 0, then the selected country ID will be that value, and we have to call this method get states by country ID, and we have to pass the selected country ID. Okay, so this will pull on change of the, that means like on change of a country, we are pulling the, for that selected country ID we are getting the states. So similar condition we are going to add for states here, and it will be selected state ID and get, the method will be this one, get cities by state ID. And on drop down change, so let's run it once and see what happens. So here we have country, then on selection of a country, if we see this query, then we are pulling the, on change of country we are pulling the states, and on change of state we are pulling the cities. Now if I rechange the country to India, then in that case this is set to 0, because if you remember, here we have added the select this line of code like reset the state and cities drop down and then again get the states. So here if I change it again, then this will auto populate. If I change it again, then in these two drop downs are reset. So here if you see the city is not loaded yet, because on change of the state we are going to load the city. Fine. So this is good so far. Now like on change of this, we want some text to be selected here, like like whatever we are selected, uh, we are changing, that should get displayed below. Okay, so let's add that. So here we are going to add a method public void update selected text. So in this update selected text, we are going to add a simple piece of code. So here if you see, we have this text equal to empty, and the selected country ID is greater than 0, then text equal to text plus country equal to, and then we are getting this country equal to, from the countries list we are getting the name of the selected country. Then if the state ID is greater than 0, then we are counting the state equal to, then from the selected state, from the states list we are getting the selected state ID, and from that we are getting the name. So similarly, for the selected city ID, we are getting the name from the cities list. Okay, and everything we are appending to this text variable. Okay, so now we have to call this update selected text method from all these three drop downs, because on change of the drop down we want the text to be updated. Okay, so for the city we are going to add this method, and we are going to remove this. So for city drop down list change, we are going to add selected city ID. Fine. Now let's run this entire piece of code and see how it works. So let's change the country. So here you can see selected country equal to 1, because on change of this, that method got executed. Okay, so we have this. Now let's change to Australia. Fine. So whatever selected things we are selecting, so that things are getting displayed in the text as what selection we did. And apart from this, like if we select it to the default selection for the country drop down, then all three get reset and this. Fine. So this all looks fine. So this was the tutorial about like cascading drop down list, and we have used entity framework core and database first approach in this. Now this entire thing can be done in a different way. So we are going to see the cascading drop down list, a second approach, how we can bind this entire thing. So here if you see, we have used this three drop down list and three on change variables to bind the, and three methods we have written: get and get countries, get states by country ID, and get cities by state ID. So we can use a different approach as well for this drop down. So let's do that. Add a new razor, or I'll simply copy this index.razor and paste it here and name it as index 2 dot razor. So in this index 2 dot razor, we are going to name it as demo 2, or we can name it as index 2. So this index 2 is like the cascading drop down list second approach. So in this second approach, we are going to create a model now. So in this Blazor app, we are going to add a new folder, and we have named it as models. Inside this models folder, we'll add a class, and we'll name it as drop down model. And inside this drop down models, we are going to add few properties. So here we have added ID, country ID, state ID, and city ID. Now if we have opened this index 2.razor, what we are going to do is we are going to remove this three variables, and we are going to remove these three methods also. And we are going to remove this three on change methods also, and this one also. So we only have a on initialized method, and we are going to name it as get master data. So we have a method public void get master data, and in this we are going to add country is equal to context dot and similarly we are going to pull all the states, all the cities. So we are pulling all the data from the countries, states, and city. Now in this countries, states, and cities, we are going to add a default value of select country. So this option we are going to remove from the text select country. Also we are going to remove it from select state, and also we are going to remove from the select city. So what we have did, like we have to insert now zero new country id equal to 0, name equal to select country. So this record we have to insert at the beginning of the countries. Similarly we have to do for state, and similarly for the cities. So here we're going to add select state, select city. So it will be new state, new city. So apart from here we are going to add country ID equal to 0 and state ID equal to 0. So these three records we have added over here. Now if you see, we have to declare one more variable over here, which will be a simple variable public drop down model. Okay, so for that we have to include the namespace here first using models public drop down model equal to new drop down model. So this drop down model we have to add at the beginning of this row at the rate ngif not equal to null. If the drop down model is not null, then we can simply add it here. So this entire thing, this entire row, we have moved inside this drop down model. Now instead of this selected where country ID, we have to use drop down model dot country ID. And similarly for state ID, we have to use drop down model dot state ID. And similarly for city, we have to use drop down model dot city ID. And the other change what we are going to do is, like in this states, we are going to use the where clause, because we are going to show all the countries. So here we don't have to add any where clause. And here on this states, we are going to add dot where x dot country ID equal to drop down model dot country ID dot to list. And similarly, the same approach we have to follow for the city drop down. But here instead of country ID, we have to select state ID. Okay. Now what we did is, like, we have removed this all these three on change events. So we have to add a new on change event here. So here in this country drop down, we have to change the entire on change event, and let's remove it from here and make it this way. So here we have the on change event, but now what we did is, like, now we have changed the on change event, and here we have added the change event args and used the lambda expression. And inside this HTML piece of code itself, we have what we did is, like, drop down model dot country ID equal to that value. And here we are calling a new method, my method, and we are passing the drop down model and with the parameter as country ID. Now similarly we have to do for this, copy this entire thing and paste it for the state one. So for state also we have to do the same thing, but here instead of country it will be state ID. And for city also we have to do the same thing. Instead of country it will be city ID. And here in this my method we have to pass state, and here we have to pass city. So let's create this method now, my method. So here in this what we did is, like, we only have now a get master data, nothing else. There's no on change event. So let's create the my method. So this my method is a simple method. It will take the drop down model as a input parameter and the type. If the type is country, then this drop down model state ID and city ID will be set to 0. If the type is state, then the city ID will be type. It's like a reset. Okay, and on this change for the city ID, we don't have to call the my method. Fine. So let's add a button also here. Oh, we can leave the button. Let's run it. and see how it works. So this was like the first approach with three different on change events and three different variables and three different methods. Now let's call index 2. So here if we see, we have India. Okay, then we have this. So I think there's some mistake. Okay, let's see what is the mistake. Get master data. So here if we see, we are not getting the default like select value. So in this HTML part, here we have to add one more condition, x dot country ID equal to 0. It can be the country ID which is selected or the country ID which is 0. Similarly for this city drop down, we have to add the state condition, x dot state ID equal to 0. Now let's run it. Let's go to index 2. Now we have the default selection, select state and select city. Now let's select. So here we have the different states. Here we have Mumbai, Pune. Fine. Australia. This got reset. Fine. And these are both empty. So here what we did is like instead of three variables, we have used a single model class. So a single class which is holding all the values. Okay, and if we want, we can add a button also here to get what is the selected value. So we can add this update selected text. So let's add a method here just below this my method. So here, similar to what we did in our first approach, we have added this drop down model and countries, we have the states, we have the cities. So it's a similar method. If we go and see the first approach, here also we have the same method like, but here we are using the three different variables. So instead of three different variables, we are using the single variable and single model class for holding all the values. Let's run it again. So here we have India, and if I click on add, then I get the selected value. So I get the selected value. So here in this video, we have discussed two different approach of binding the cascading drop-down list, or also we can see like how we can bind a drop-down list. If we want to bind a single drop-down list also, then also we can use this two different approach. So whatever approach you like, you can use in your project. So that was it in this video. And if you really like this video, please subscribe my channel. If you have any doubt regarding this video, some better suggestion, whatever you feel, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.